What if the greatest World War II stories weren't the ones you already know? From the jungles of Borneo to the bunkers of Berlin, this is the side of World War II cinema you've probably never seen. But you'll never forget. Here are the 19 best World War II movies of the 1980s. The Big Red One. This one came straight from the trenches. Literally. Director Samuel Fuller wasn't just some Hollywood guy playing war. He actually lived it. Served in the 1st Infantry Division, the real Big Red One, and saw some of the worst battles of World War II up close. That makes this movie more than a story. It's his own memory projected onto the screen. Lee Marvin plays the hard-nosed sergeant leading a group of 4 soldiers through the war, including a young Mark Hamill just a few years after Star Wars made him a star. And Marvin wasn't acting either. He had real combat injuries from his time in the Pacific and didn't need direction to play a hardened veteran. Fuller used that authenticity to ground the movie in something that didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a report from the front. But the real drama happened off-screen. Fuller turned in a version of the film that was over 4 hours long. He called it his life's work. But the studio didn't want that. They cut it to under 2 hours, removed whole story arcs, entire battles, and changed the tone completely. Fuller never got over that. He said they cut out the soul of the film. It wasn't until decades later that a reconstructed version was released, using his notes and old footage, finally giving people a glimpse of what he intended. They shot across multiple countries, Israel, Ireland, California, making do with tight budgets and even tighter shooting schedules. Some of the extras were actual soldiers who didn't even speak the language. Explosions were often improvised. And the story doesn't follow a traditional arc because Fuller didn't believe war had one. He said war was chaos, random, and messy. That's why the Big Red One feels so real. It's not trying to impress anyone. It just tells the truth, whether or not people are ready for it. Empire of the Sun. When people talk about Spielberg, they mention the big ones, Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park. But there's one movie that almost derailed his career, and that's Empire of the Sun. Released in 1987, it didn't light up the box office. It didn't win major awards, but it might be his most personal, most haunting work. The story follows a young British boy named Jim, played by a 13-year-old Christian Bale in his very first film role. Jim is separated from his parents in Shanghai during the Japanese invasion and ends up in an internment camp. But this isn't a story about survival through action. It's about surviving mentally, emotionally. The real war here is inside Jim's head. Spielberg cast Bale after seeing thousands of kids. Something about him stood out, and it paid off. Bale carries the entire movie. There's a scene where he salutes a group of Japanese pilots, and it's not clear whether it's admiration, trauma, or both. That confusion is what makes the film so powerful. They filmed in Shanghai, one of the first American productions allowed to do so since the 1940s. The scale was massive. They built full airfields from scratch, used real planes, and staged enormous crowd scenes with hundreds of extras. Spielberg wanted everything to feel grounded. He wanted it to hurt. The production was rough. There were arguments on set, especially between Spielberg and the adult cast like John Malkovich. Some said Spielberg was too controlling, too focused on the boys' perspective to give the rest of the actors direction. But that was the point. The film isn't about them. It's about what war looks like when you're too young to understand it, but old enough to know it's destroying everything. Critics appreciated the film, but audiences didn't show up. Warner Brothers barely promoted it. Years later, it's been rediscovered and praised for what it is. A war movie that doesn't glorify, doesn't dramatize, just shows you what it's like to lose everything and still keep going. Come and See. There are war movies, and then there's Come and See. A film that doesn't just show you war, it drags you through it. Made in the Soviet Union in 1985, this film was directed by Elim Klimov. And it's not just considered one of the greatest anti-war films ever made, it's one of the most emotionally devastating pieces of cinema in history. The story is simple, but horrifying. A boy named Floria finds a rifle and joins the partisans fighting the Nazis in Belarus. What follows is not a heroic journey. It's a descent into trauma, madness, and the death of innocence. By the end of the film, Floria doesn't even look like the same person. His face, his eyes, they change. And they don't change back. This wasn't just acting. The film was shot on location where actual atrocities occurred. Many of the villagers and extras weren't actors at all. They were people who had lived through similar horrors. The co-writer, Ales Adamovich, was himself a child partisan during the war. That's why the details are so brutal and so specific. Because they're not fiction. Everything was filmed using natural light. Most of the audio was recorded live. There are no flashy effects or dramatic music cues. When bombs go off, they sound like they're going off right next to you. The tension is unbearable. The silence in some scenes is even worse. Klimov fought hard to make sure nothing was sugar-coated. He refused to let the actors rehearse too much. He wanted their reactions to be real. The scene where Floria is nearly deafened by an explosion, that wasn't faked. They actually simulated the pressure change to get the right expression on the actor's face. The film ends with a powerful statement. Nazi forces destroyed over 600 Belarusian villages, wiped them out completely. That number isn't just part of the script, it's part of history. And after watching Come and See, you'll never forget it. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. This one's not your typical World War II movie. There are no epic battles, no large-scale firefights. Instead, it's all about the tension between people, the clash of cultures, and the slow psychological unraveling that happens when you're trapped and powerless. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, directed by Nagisa Oshima in 1983, takes place inside a Japanese prisoner of war camp, but it feels more like a test of identity than a test of survival. The story focuses on a British officer, played by David Bowie, who gets thrown into the camp and ends up in a strange emotional standoff with the Japanese commandant. Bowie was not your typical actor, but he brought something eerie and captivating to the role. According to people on set, he accepted the part after seeing just one photo of the character in uniform. He never rehearsed. He didn't want to. He believed spontaneity was the key to truth, and he insisted every take feel like it was the first. That made things tough for the director. Bowie's unpredictability forced the camera crew to stay sharp, and it led to one of the most iconic scenes in the movie. The moment where Bowie walks toward his executioners in total silence without saying a word. That was done in one take. No dialogue, no rehearsal, just raw presence. But the movie isn't just about Bowie. It's about misunderstanding, honor, shame, and cultural barriers. Ryuichi Sakamoto, who also composed the score, plays the Japanese camp commander. And it's not a one-sided portrayal. You see the weight on both sides. There's cruelty, yes, but also moments of strange connection. Moments where you see a glimpse of respect trying to break through. Critics were divided when the film premiered. Some called it brilliant. Others walked out confused. Even Bowie himself later admitted he never fully understood the character. But that might be what makes it so haunting. It's not about understanding. It's about being lost in a place where the rules don't make sense anymore. And that, in its own way, is just another form of war. Triumph of the Spirit. Most war movies try to balance reality with a little bit of distance, enough to keep the audience comfortable. Triumph of the Spirit didn't care about comfort. Released in 1989 and starring Willem Dafoe, this one dives headfirst into the absolute darkest part of World War II. It tells the true story of Salomo Arush, a Greek-Jewish boxer who was deported to Auschwitz. But instead of being sent straight to the gas chambers, the Nazis forced him to fight other prisoners for their entertainment. If he won, he survived. If he lost, he died, and so did the man he beat. The movie made history just by existing. It was the first dramatic feature ever allowed to film inside Auschwitz. That decision alone caused a storm of controversy. Survivors were outraged. The Polish government later admitted they regretted granting permission. The subject matter was just too raw, too real. Willem Dafoe went all in. He lost over 30 pounds to look the part. He trained for months to learn the real boxing style Salomo used. And it wasn't just physical. He said it was the hardest role of his life emotionally. Every scene had to be treated like it really happened, because for the real Salomo, it did. Director Robert M. Young fought constantly with the studio to keep the film intact. Executives wanted edits, softer angles, fewer disturbing details. But Young refused. He knew that sanitizing this story would be a betrayal. That meant the movie barely got a release. It opened in just a handful of theaters. No big marketing push, no awards campaign, just silence. But silence can be powerful. The movie isn't flashy, and it doesn't offer any easy victories. It just stares directly into the face of something too many people try to forget. And even if it didn't get the attention it deserved, Triumph of the Spirit stands as a brutal reminder of what happens when human dignity is used as currency. There's nothing triumphant about it, except the fact that it was told at all. Fat Man and Little Boy. There's a kind of tension that's different from battlefields. It doesn't come from bullets or bombs. It comes from decisions. Words spoken behind closed doors. Equations scribbled on blackboards that can change the entire world. That's the kind of war Fat Man and Little Boy is about. Released in 1989 and directed by Roland Joffé, this film doesn't show you the battlefield. It shows you the lab where the battlefield was invented. Paul Newman plays General Leslie Groves, the man in charge of the Manhattan Project. Dwight Schultz plays Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant physicist whose team was tasked with building the first atomic bomb. On paper, it's a war movie without a war, but what it actually is a slow-motion moral crisis. The project's real-life goal was clear: beat the Nazis to the bomb. But the deeper you get into the film, the less clear things become. Scientists start to question what they're doing. Some wonder if creating this kind of weapon can ever be justified. Others worry it's already too late to stop. Newman brings a gruff kind of authority to the role, but even he seems haunted by what's happening. His character isn't a villain, but he's also not a hero. Making the film wasn't easy. The studio clashed with Joffé constantly. He wanted to show the fallout, not just the science, but the consequences. But executives were nervous. Scenes showing Japanese civilians after the bomb were cut for being too political. The final product was compromised. What could have been a searing moral exploration ended up feeling unfinished. It bombed at the box office, cost $30 million, made less than $4 million. Critics said it lacked focus, didn't go deep enough. Even Newman later admitted he didn't fully understand his role. But for all its flaws, there's still something important in there. A reminder that war doesn't always look like a battlefield. Sometimes it looks like a chalkboard, a blueprint, and a clock counting down. Codename Emerald. Sometimes the deadliest war stories aren't told with bullets. They're told with lies. Codename Emerald, released in 1985, is one of those stories. On the surface, it's a straightforward spy thriller. But under the surface, it's about the cost of deception, the confusion of loyalty, and the pressure of living in a world where the truth could get someone killed. Ed Harris stars as a double agent operating inside a Nazi prisoner of war camp. His mission? To protect an Allied officer who holds key information about the upcoming D-Day invasion. But it's not as simple as sneaking in and getting out. Harris's character is caught between two worlds, pretending to serve the Germans while secretly working for the Allies. As the story unfolds, even he starts to lose track of which side he's really on. The film was inspired by real-life Allied operations that used misdirection and infiltration to keep Nazi intelligence off balance. But it takes plenty of creative liberties. Harris later admitted that he didn't fully understand the plot until they were nearly finished filming. So, he made a choice. Play every scene like he was lying, even when he wasn't. That decision adds a strange layer of tension to the whole movie. You're never quite sure what's real, and neither is he. Universal Pictures didn't know what to do with it. They tried marketing it like a James Bond-style action film, even though the pace is more psychological than explosive. Most of the $9 million budget went into sets and vintage military planes, leaving little for post-production polish. Director Jonathan Sanger had to cut over 30 minutes of footage just to meet the studio's demands. And it shows. Critics called it serviceable. A few said it felt like a long television movie. But underneath the rough edges, Codename, Emerald is doing something different. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It builds slow dread. It's not about winning the war. It's about surviving your own cover story long enough to make a difference. And sometimes, that's the harder fight. Eye of the Needle. Most spy movies glamorize the work. Fast cars, clever gadgets, smooth operators. But Eye of the Needle, released in 1981, strips all that away. This is a quiet, cold thriller with teeth, set not in the shadows of cities, but on a windswept island off the coast of Scotland. And it centers around one of the most ruthless characters ever put on screen. Donald Sutherland plays the Needle, a German spy stranded in enemy territory with critical information about the D-Day invasion. He's supposed to deliver that intel back to Berlin, but before he can, he ends up on a remote island, cut off from the outside world. There, he meets a woman and her disabled husband. What starts as a simple waiting game turns into something much darker, a story of control, deception, and isolation. Sutherland's performance is icy, methodical. He doesn't choose scenery or give grand speeches. He simply is this character, calm, brutal, and calculating. He does terrible things, and yet somehow, you can't stop watching him. That's what makes the movie so unsettling. There's no charm here, just a man doing what he believes must be done, no matter the cost. The production was tough. They filmed in Northumberland and on the Isle of Mull, and the weather nearly destroyed the shoot. Storms halted filming, equipment was damaged, and at one point, Sutherland himself nearly fell off a cliff. But he kept going. No stunt doubles, no shortcuts, just pure commitment. Kate Nelligan plays the woman he gets involved with, and her performance is just as essential. Vulnerable but smart, scared but not helpless. She grounds the film in emotion, especially when the story takes a turn towards psychological warfare between them. Director Richard Marquand stuck close to the source novel, written by Ken Follett. But after early test screenings left audiences confused by the flashbacks, he was forced to make cuts. The final version is leaner, more focused, and arguably better for it. Eye of the Needle doesn't scream for attention, but it doesn't have to. It's sharp, quiet, and devastating, just like the spy at its center. The Sea Wolves. Not every war story is about young soldiers charging into the unknown. Some are about older men, forgotten, underestimated, but still willing to risk everything. The Sea Wolves, released in 1980, tells one of those stories. And the best part? It's all based on a real-life operation that remained classified for decades. The film stars three legends: Gregory Peck, Roger Moore, and David Niven. But they're not playing action heroes. They're portraying aging veterans from the British Calcutta Light Horse Regiment, long retired, called back into action for one last mission. Their target? A German ship hiding in the neutral port of Goa, India, broadcasting signals to Nazi U-boats. British intelligence came up with a wild plan. Instead of using regular troops, they recruited older men, civilians with military pasts, to sneak into the harbor, blow up the ship, and vanish. It sounds like fiction, but it really happened. And the Sea Wolves tells it with quiet pride and old-school charm. Filming was an adventure in itself. They shot on location in India and Malta. The heat was brutal. The logistics were tough. At one point, Gregory Peck nearly walked off the set after getting heat stroke and coming down with a parasite infection. Roger Moore insisted on doing his own stunts, which included crawling through actual sewers. No doubles. Just sweat and stubbornness. The big explosion at the end? That wasn't special effects. They packed real explosives onto an old freighter and blew it sky high. The blast nearly destroyed the camera rig and sent debris flying in all directions. It wasn't just a scene, it was a real detonation. Audiences didn't flock to it. Critics said it moved too slow. Some found it too traditional, too quiet in an age of louder war films. But veterans loved it. Military history buffs praised its accuracy and its focus on unsung heroes. And in a way, that's exactly what the film is about. Men who didn't ask for glory, but stepped up when no one else could. Farewell to the King. If you think you've heard every kind of World War II story, Farewell to the King will prove you wrong. Released in 1989, directed by John Milius, and starring Nick Nolte, this is a war movie unlike any other. It doesn't take place in Europe. It's not about Allied generals or famous battles. It's about one man who walks away from the war and then finds himself leading a new kind of fight. The story follows an American soldier named Leroyd, played by Nolte, who deserts during the war and ends up in the jungles of Borneo. But instead of just hiding, he's adopted by a native tribe. Over time, he earns their respect and rises to power. By the time the Japanese arrive, Leroyd is no longer a soldier. He's their king. And when the fight comes to his people, he leads them in guerrilla warfare against the occupiers. It sounds like something out of legend, but it's rooted in real events. The film is based on a novel by Pierre Schoendorfer, a French war correspondent who knew firsthand what combat could do to a man. Milius, best known for Conan the Barbarian and his script work on Apocalypse Now, saw this story as deeply personal. To him, it was about redemption, about escaping the machinery of war to find something worth protecting. The production was intense. Filming in the Malaysian jungle meant dealing with over 110-degree heat, rainstorms, insects, and disease. Nolte himself came down with dengue fever and battled exhaustion. Milius didn't want any Hollywood polish. He made the cast live among real tribal communities. No trailers, no pampering. They slept in huts, learned to use machetes, and moved through the jungle like actual warriors. Nolte refused to rehearse. He believed his performance had to come from instinct, not repetition. That made some scenes nearly impossible to shoot cleanly, but it also gave the film a raw edge. He delivered long monologues off script, half shouting into the wind, daring the jungle to argue back. The film barely made a dent at the box office. Released at the wrong time, with little promotion, it vanished almost immediately. But critics who caught it saw something rare, an anti-war epic that's also deeply spiritual. In Farewell to the King, the battle isn't just against an enemy. It's against the part of yourself that believes you're only meant for violence. Anola Gay. The men, the mission, the atomic bomb. There are moments in history that change everything. Moments where decisions made by a handful of people echo for generations. Anola Gay. The men, the mission, the atomic bomb, a made-for-television film released in 1980, doesn't use flash. It doesn't use spectacle. What it uses is focus on one mission, one aircraft, and the weight that came with it. The film centers on the real-life crew of the Anola Gay, the plane that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima in August 1945. Rather than creating a broad war epic, this film drills down into the logistics, the people, and the moral storm surrounding that moment. It's less about explosions and more about conversations, the kind of conversations that kept people awake long after the mission was over. The cast includes Patrick Duffy and Billy Crystal in early dramatic roles that showed a different side of their talent. Their portrayals of military men grappling with responsibility make the story feel grounded, almost documentary-like. You're watching characters who know they're a part of something massive, but haven't fully grasped what it means yet. Filming wasn't a blockbuster affair. This was a low-budget production meant for TV audiences. But the attention to detail is surprisingly strong. The Anola Gay replica was built to exact scale, and the flight logistics were consulted by aviation experts to make sure nothing was fictionalized. There's no stylized combat here, just careful procedures, solemn briefings, and real-world consequences. The film doesn't take sides. It doesn't argue for or against the bomb. It just shows what happened, what had to be done, what was feared, and what was never forgotten. That approach gave it quiet power. Teachers used it in classrooms. Historians praised its restraint. Veterans said it captured the emotional weight of that moment better than many bigger budget efforts ever could. You don't watch Anola Gay for action. You watch it for understanding, and that may be why it still matters. It reminds us that war isn't just about fighting. It's about choices. And sometimes, the heaviest battles are the ones fought inside the mind of a man who pulled a lever and changed the world. The bunker. In most World War II films, Adolf Hitler is a distant figure, a shadow, a voice on the radio, a presence behind enemy lines. The bunker, released in 1981, doesn't follow that pattern. It puts you right beside him, inside the claustrophobic final days of the Third Reich, deep beneath Berlin, as everything falls apart. The film stars Anthony Hopkins in one of his most haunting roles. Long before The Silence of the Lambs, Hopkins brought Hitler to life, not as a cartoon villain, but as a crumbling human being, angry, delusional, isolated. He doesn't rant from balconies here. He paces, he mutters, he turns on the people closest to him. It's terrifying in a completely different way. Set almost entirely inside the Führer bunker during the final weeks of the war, the movie captures the suffocating atmosphere of a regime in free fall. The walls are closing in, both literally and figuratively. Soviet artillery pounds the city above. Food and supplies are running out. The most loyal commanders begin to lose faith. And still, the man in charge refuses to face reality. The production went for accuracy over drama. The The script was based on historical transcripts and survivor interviews. Every hallway, every uniform, every military map was designed to match the real thing. That commitment to realism gives the film an eerie weight. You're not watching a thriller, you're watching history unravel in real time. Hopkins didn't overplay it. He didn't try to imitate every tick or speech pattern. Instead, he found the broken core of the character. A man whose empire was built on lies, now surrounded by the truth and trying desperately not to look at it. The performance earned him awards and praise for making the most infamous figure in modern history feel disturbingly human. The Bunker doesn't glorify or excuse anything. It shows a leader unraveling under pressure and a nation collapsing around him. It's a story about the end, not just of a war, but of a delusion. And sometimes, the scariest battles happen in silence, behind sealed doors, when there's no one left to believe in your orders. To end all wars. There are war stories where the battle happens with guns and tanks. And then there are stories like To End All Wars, where the real war takes place in the heart. Though this film wasn't released in the 1980s, its tone and message feel directly descended from the war dramas of that era. Gritty, character-driven, and unwilling to turn away from hard questions. Set in a Japanese prison camp during World War II, To End All Wars tells the true story of Allied prisoners forced to build the infamous Burma Railway under brutal conditions. But instead of focusing just on survival, the film looks at something deeper, how forgiveness, faith, and dignity can survive even when everything else has been taken away. The story centers on a Scottish soldier named Ernest Gordon, a real man whose memoirs form the basis of the film. As he and his fellow soldiers suffer forced labor, beatings, and near starvation, they're also forced to confront their own beliefs about honor, about revenge, and about the meaning of life when death is always just a few feet away. The cast includes Robert Carlyle and Kiefer Sutherland, both delivering restrained, powerful performances. Carlyle plays a hardened officer who sees forgiveness as weakness. Sutherland's character is more conflicted, pulled between rage and redemption. Together, they represent the battle raging inside every prisoner. Filming took place in remote parts of Thailand, where the real railway was once constructed. The conditions were intense: mud, heat, insects, and no escape from the natural discomfort of the jungle. That authenticity bleeds into every frame. You can see it in the sweat, in the cuts, in the expressions of exhaustion on the actors' faces. This is not a film about heroism in the traditional sense. There are no grand battle scenes or last-minute rescues. What makes To End All Wars so moving is that it shows the strength it takes to hold on to your humanity in a place designed to strip it away. The real Ernest Gordon went on to become a chaplain after the war. His legacy wasn't just survival, it was peace, and that's something worth remembering. A Soldier's Story. Some of the most powerful World War II movies never leave American soil. A Soldier's Story, released in 1984, is one of those. It's not about foreign battlefields or enemy combatants. It's about what happens within the ranks, where loyalty, identity, and prejudice collide under the same uniform. Set on a Louisiana Army base in 1944, the story kicks off with a murder. A black sergeant has been shot, and suspicion runs wild. Was it a racist civilian, another soldier, or something even more complicated? The Army sends in Captain Davenport, a rare black officer, to investigate. What he finds isn't just a crime, it's a system that's rotting from the inside. Howard E. Rollins Jr. plays Davenport with quiet authority. As he peels back the layers of the murder, he uncovers resentment, jealousy, and the deep scars of racism. Scars that don't go away just because everyone's fighting on the same side. Adolph Caesar delivers a stunning performance as the murdered sergeant, whose toughness may have crossed the line into cruelty. Directed by Norman Jewison, the film feels like a stage play. And that's because it started as one. The tension builds in conversations, in glances, in unspoken rules. Every scene asks a question. What does it mean to wear the uniform of a country that doesn't treat you equally? The setting may be World War II, but the themes stretch far beyond that. The idea that some battles are fought with fists and others with dignity is what makes this film timeless. And it doesn't offer easy answers. Justice in the end comes with a cost. And what's left behind is the uncomfortable truth that unity doesn't erase injustice. Critics praise the film for its nuance and honesty. It earned multiple award nominations, and Adolf Caesar's performance remains one of the most underrated in war film history. A Soldier's Story reminds us that war doesn't just reveal the enemy outside the gates, it exposes the ones already inside. 15. The Dirty Dozen, Next Mission. You can't talk about World War II movies without mentioning The Dirty Dozen. It's one of the most iconic war films ever made. But what many people forget is that in 1985, the story didn't end. It continued with The Dirty Dozen, Next Mission. And while it doesn't try to outdo the original, it does something smart. It brings the same grit and danger into a new mission, with new stakes. This time around, the team is brought back together to assassinate a high-ranking Nazi general before he can organize resistance forces as the Allies push deeper into Europe. Once again, their convicts offered a chance at redemption in exchange for a suicide mission, and once again, the odds are stacked against them. Lee Marvin returns as Major Reisman, still gruff, still sarcastic, still completely unwilling to play by the rules. His presence alone ties the film back to its predecessor. But what's interesting about this sequel is how it leans into the characters' instability. These aren't heroes, they're broken men with dark pasts, and that makes them unpredictable in the best possible way. The mission takes them through bombed-out towns, enemy camps, and high-risk ambushes. The action sequences are tight and brutal. There's no glamour here, just rough-edge combat, betrayals, and a constant sense that anyone could be lost at any moment. Unlike the first film, which played in theaters and became a classic, this sequel was made for television. That meant a smaller budget, tighter shoot, and less room for spectacle. But the core of the story stayed the same. Redemption isn't given, it's earned, and sometimes the only way to earn it is through fire. While it never reached the iconic status of the original, The Dirty Dozen, Next Mission holds its own. It honors the legacy without copying it beat for beat. And for fans who wanted one more round with Major Reisman and his ragtag team, it delivered just enough grit, just enough chaos, and just enough heart to make the mission worth remembering. Hansen. Some war films take place on battlefields, others take place in the mind. Hansen, released in 1988 and directed by Istvan Sabo, belongs in the second category. It's a psychological thriller set in the final days of the Weimar Republic, as the world edges closer to the catastrophe of World War II. But this isn't about armies or generals. It's about a man who could see the future and saw darkness coming. The story follows Erik Jan Hansen, a real historical figure and performer who claimed to possess clairvoyant abilities. He becomes a sensation in the 1930s Germany, performing hypnosis, reading minds, and predicting political events with eerie accuracy. But as his fame grows, so does the threat around him. Because in the world he's navigating, truth is dangerous. And power even more so. Klaus Maria Brandauer plays Hansen with a quiet, magnetic intensity. There's something off about him, even when he's standing perfectly still. You can't tell if he's gifted or disturbed, brilliant or broken. And that ambiguity is the point. In a time where reality is twisting into propaganda and fear, certainty becomes a weapon. And Hansen may have too much of it. The film is drenched in atmosphere. Smoke-filled stages, dimly lit clubs, marching boots in the streets. It all builds a picture of a society on the brink. There's a deep sense of dread in every frame. You already know how the story ends. Germany descends into fascism, but watching it happen through the eyes of a man who claims to have seen it all coming makes it even more haunting. Hansen doesn't feature combat scenes or war strategy. Instead, it shows the psychological warfare that comes before the bombs drop. The film explores complicity, manipulation, and the cost of staying silent. Hansen performs for the rising Nazi elite, and for a while, they treat him as a novelty. But eventually, every truth-teller becomes a threat. And in a world where lies are currency, the man who speaks honestly may not survive. It's a chilling portrait of a forgotten figure caught in the gears of history, and in today's world, it feels more relevant than ever. Hope and glory. Most World War II films focus on soldiers, on their courage, their loss, their trials. But Hope and Glory, released in 1987, takes a completely different approach. It doesn't follow a soldier, it follows a child A boy growing up in London during the Blitz, where bombs fall from the sky and school gets cancelled because the classroom doesn't exist anymore. Director John Boorman wrote the film based on his own childhood. That's why it feels so vivid, so strange, and so real. This isn't a sentimental look back. It's not sugar-coated, but it's not entirely bleak either. It shows war the way a child might see it, not with horror, but with wonder, confusion, and sometimes even joy. The main character is Billy, a young boy trying to make sense of a world that keeps getting stranger. He watches his neighborhood crumble, his family argue, and his schoolmates vanish into evacuation lines. But he also sees beauty in the chaos. Rivers to swim in, abandoned buildings to explore, and freedom where there used to be rules. Boorman captures the contradictions perfectly. Air raids are terrifying, but also exciting. Destruction means danger, but also adventure. It's not that Billy doesn't understand what's happening. It's that he processes it differently, and in doing so, he reveals something adults often forget. Children endure war too, just in their own way. The film doesn't have a grand climax. There's no battlefield victory or heroic sacrifice. Instead, the final image is quiet and strange. Billy looking out over a world he no longer recognizes, full of questions the adults around him can't answer. Hope and Glory won critical acclaim for its honesty and its warmth. It showed that war isn't just fought with guns. It's fought in living rooms, on playgrounds, and in the hearts of families trying to hold themselves together. And while many World War II films end with silence or sadness, this one ends with a grin, a reminder that even in the darkest days, hope finds a way to survive. The Winds of War. Sometimes a film is too big for the big screen. It needs more time, more room, more story. The Winds of War, released in 1983 as a television miniseries, is that kind of project. Spanning continents and years, it tells the sprawling tale of a family caught in the rising tide of global conflict. It's not just a war story, it's a portrait of a world unraveling. At the center is Victor "Pug" Henry, a naval officer played by Robert Mitchum. As Europe inches toward war, Henry is sent on diplomatic missions across the globe. Along the way, he sees firsthand the gathering storm, from Berlin to Moscow, from London to Pearl Harbor. Meanwhile, his family is scattered and struggling, each of them facing personal challenges that mirror the global chaos. The scope of the Winds of War is staggering. Based on the novel by Herman Wouk, the production took years to plan and film. Sets were built in multiple countries, the cast numbered in the hundreds. Battles are recreated, but so are quiet moments, state dinners, hushed warnings, moral decisions made in private rooms. What makes the series work is its balance. For every scene of military strategy, there's a scene of heartbreak or moral conflict. For every historic speech, there's a whispered doubt from a character wondering if the world can ever be made right again. The show is about war, yes, but more than that, it's about people who are trying to understand what war is doing to them. Critics praised the series for its ambition. Viewers tuned in by the millions. And even today, it's remembered as one of the most successful miniseries ever made. Not because it was flashy or explosive, but because it took the time to make the war feel human. In a decade full of loud action movies, The Winds of War slowed down and listened. It reminded viewers that before the first shot is fired, hearts are already breaking. War and Remembrance. If The Winds of War was the storm gathering, then War and Remembrance is the flood that follows. Released in 1988 as a continuation of the earlier miniseries, this one picks up right where the last story left off. But it doesn't just continue, it deepens, expands, and ultimately delivers one of the most emotionally powerful portrayals of World War II ever put on screen. The story follows the Henry family as the war escalates, from Pearl Harbor to Midway, from the Nazi death camps to the fall of Berlin. This time, it doesn't just show war from the military side. It brings viewers inside the Holocaust, the resistance movements, and the moral agony of those caught between duty and conscience. Robert Mitchum returns as Victor Henry, but the series also broadens its focus. We see his children making their own choices, some brave, some heartbreaking. We follow Jewish characters trying to survive the ghettos and camps, and we watch political leaders struggling to grasp the full weight of what's happening. The production was one of the most expensive in television history at the time. No corners were cut. Real locations were used whenever possible. Extras numbered in the thousands. and the decision to film scenes inside actual European concentration camp memorials gave the series a gravity that no fictional set ever could. One of the most unforgettable sequences is the depiction of Auschwitz. It's not dramatized, it's not stylized. It's shown as it was, cold, terrifying, and real. The camera doesn't flinch, and neither does the story. War and Remembrance isn't easy to watch, but that's the point. It wasn't made to entertain. It was made to remember, to preserve, and to honor those whose stories were nearly lost to time. Together, the winds of war and Remembrance form a tapestry, rich, devastating, and absolutely essential. They remind us that war is not just about generals and victories. It's about families, choices, and the long echo of history. If this journey through forgotten war films moved you, challenged you, or gave you something new to think about, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into powerful cinema and the stories behind the screen. Because some films don't just entertain, they make sure we never forget.